Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here then hi, my name is Miss Paris and on my channel you can find tips, advice and information about teaching as well as following on with my personal journey. So I'm just going to start talking. So anyone that watches this on replay doesn't have to just watch me awkwardly sit here. And then obviously when people join, then I can chat to them. So this live really was just to catch up with you all. I realized that in one of my previous videos where I did a career update, I kind of dropped the bombshell that I completely stopped being a class teacher from September up to December. So if there's any questions about that, then I will cover those. And I also wanted to talk about something that, really just stood out to me about that experience, and that was the importance of adaptive teaching. So I have some notes with me, and I'm going to talk about different ways that you can, demonstrate adaptive teaching. Please bear with me though, because I'm so used to calling it differentiation that if I start calling it that, I apologize. It has now been changed to adaptive teaching, but that's what I'm used to calling it. And like I said, if there's any questions throughout, then I will just answer that. If you are watching, then please don't forget to say hello. It's always nice to talk to you guys as well as just talking to a camera and to myself, essentially. But yes, today today hasn't been the most productive. Yesterday, I was just lesson planning most of the day because it was very grim outside. But today I've been on a nice, I think it was just edging on 10K walk. So I feel very refreshed, ready for Monday, although I'm in slight denial that it is Monday. But yes, I can't wait for my first full week with my new class. So that is very exciting. Now, if you haven't been able to catch up with that recent video, I was just talking about what I've been up to since September. So in the last personal journey update video I did, it was talking about how the position that I was in year one was temporary, it was with an agency, and it was not being carried through. So I entered the summer holidays with nothing necessarily lined up for September. Now, September came and the agency rang me and said, would you like to do 2 weeks of supply, but as a TA, in kind of an SEN section of a mainstream school? And as there was no real SEN focus on my PGCE or my skip journey, I kind of thought, why not? Good experience. And basically, I ended up staying there. And afterwards, a position came up for a class teacher. And so I have remained at that school. So yeah, it's been really nice, a 2-week kind of placement just to fill the time ended up being, a journey to taking me to class teacher. So that's been really, really nice and it has kept me busy. I think there's a lot of talk recently of finding it hard to get a teaching job. Of course, there are loads of factors that, come into this, such as your location, where you are, how many schools there are around you, etc. But one thing that I always recommend is staying in the classroom if possible, or anything education related, whether that's kind of online tutoring or, being a teaching assistant or a learning support, one-to-one support. All of that's just really good experience because even if you're not the one teaching, you can observe teachers, you can still observe different styles of teaching, different behavior management techniques. So it's, really, really important to do so. If you are here, then please do say hi because then I can say hi back and just check in and see how you guys are. So yes, that's kind of what I've been up to. And in the SEN section of that school, we called it the PRB. Well, it still is called the PRB. What I did is I kind of worked with 2 or 3 pupils. I kind of printed off their lessons. I would be almost the teacher, but for them, if that makes sense. There was obviously the main class teacher, and she was responsible for all the children, but we kind of had our own little groups of children. That being said, one thing that I really learnt the value of was teamwork. It's honestly incredible. Like if you could see one person struggling or, they were just kind of, the staff was just having enough, or even if the pupil was, we kind of quickly pounced on and just said, oh, okay, well, we'll help, or, we really had each other's back. So that was absolutely wonderful. And now my teaching assistant, now that I'm a class teacher, my teaching assistant is absolutely amazing. So that was really, really valuable for me. Another thing that was really valuable for me was, like I said in the intro, learning the importance of adaptive teaching. Now, adaptive teaching, previously called differentiation, is the ability to adapt your lesson, your resources, to different children and to different children's needs. Now, obviously, all children have different needs. They have, naturally just have different academic capabilities. But then obviously you've got some children that might have additional needs, such as special educational needs, or maybe they are, English is their second language, and so they've got a language barrier. There's loads of different things that we have to cater to. And especially now that we are in a time where we focus on inclusive education rather than I don't know if I can say it right, integrative or integrative education, we get more and more different needs in the class. So I think it's really important to talk about and give examples of how we can do adaptive teaching. Now, just as a little contextual background, in case you don't know the difference, inclusive education, which is what we have now, is where the system has to adapt to the children. Whereas previously, it used to be the child has to adapt to the system. If they can't adapt to the system, then they would have to go elsewhere. So it really wasn't very welcoming, and it failed a lot of children in a sense, because they couldn't access the learning, they couldn't access their right to education, just because their needs weren't being met. So yes, I am, I've always been passionate about it. I have a degree in psychology. I've always been interested in it. I have some kind of like personal background with special educational needs, but this just enhanced my passion for it further. So I did a very brief post on adaptive teaching on my Instagram, which is at the Petite Primary. If you don't follow me there, go and follow me. But I really wanted to expand on it further verbally, because otherwise, it makes the captions long and people don't want to read it. But yes, so that's what I'm going to expand on today. I don't know if the chat just isn't working or if nobody's saying anything to me, but if you are here, give me a wave or say something. But yes, so adaptive teaching, there's different ways that you can do this, and there's no right or wrong. Sometimes you do just need to do a trial and error type of thing, see what works for the child, because what might work for one child might not work for the other, even if they have the same diagnosis, even if they have the same or similar EHCPs. It just might not work. Everyone has their personal choice of things. And, I think it's also important to understand that, just generally speaking in life, let alone when it comes to lessons. Hi, Lawrence. Thank you for saying hi. How are you? Are you good? So yes, one of these ways of doing adaptive teaching, and of course I'm a primary school teacher, so not everything I say might be applicable to secondary, but hopefully you can kind of get some ideas from what I'm about to say if you are a secondary school teacher and still try and adapt it to your classes and your subject. So yes, first thing with adaptive teaching is just the size of the workload. So if you have a very capable writer, let's say it's an English lesson, and there is a learning intention to, use imperative verbs in sentences. Now, for some children, your greater depth children, you could expect them to write at least 5 steps, let's say you're doing instructions, and use imperative verbs in there. Now, for some children that struggle with spelling or struggle with understanding, English might not be their first language, you might just be happy with them being able to, understand what an imperative verb is and then just applying it to a sentence. So you might have a word bank, and for them to already read the sentence that you've written is significant enough, and then they have to pick the word from the word bank, the correct imperative verb to match that sentence. That might be enough. So yes, you can't always expect them to have the same amount, because, it's not plausible. And also, who do you then cater to? Because then you might be like, right, so I'm going to give the same amount for the children working towards age-related expectations and the children who are greater depth. Well, either the greater depth are going to get bored and they're just going to finish really quickly. So you always need an extension. And, you know, gradually they might figure out that if they work quick enough, that means they always get extra work. So they might just end up working slowly and not really make any progress. Or do you do it at a standard where greater depth they are challenged, and then afterwards, you know, you have the working towards children, or even the children who are working at age related expectations, who are struggling or who always have incomplete work, or who aren't able to, you know, reach their target, the learning objective, because it's just they can't access it, you know. So, and that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I hope everyone watching this is just like, yeah, obviously. So just the size of the workload for them, that is a way to do adaptive teaching. You know, you don't always need to have extra things put in place. Just be able to understand what each child's capabilities are. That's already a big thing. Another thing you might be able to adapt is the time that you give children to do a task. So, for example, you might be doing maths and you think, right, I'm just going to do a quick overview, a quick retrieval practice of what we did last lesson. And then I'm going to explain to them, model a few examples, and then explain to them what they're doing. Now, for some children, you might just think, right, they need to be here for the retrieval because they still need to practice what we're doing last lesson. And so there's no point confusing them further unless it benefits them in showing them the model of what the others are doing this lesson. You could just let them go off with, you know, a teaching assistant, or, you know, with their resources already made, and let them have extra time. Alternatively, they might need a longer input so that you can model further. Okay, so time is a really big thing because, like I said, some children are just naturally quicker at writing or calculations, etc. So you really need to adapt it. You know, you don't have to always have a whole class input. You can have cutoff groups, or you might do some children working on a task independently, some on the carpet, or, you know, you're doing the input, and then swap round. So then afterwards, those children, you can set them off to do an independent task. And then the children who are doing the independent task first can come to the carpet, or, you know, do your input, whatever the situation is. So you can be flexible with time. And I think that's something that, especially if you're new in your teaching career, or if you are, you know, doing your teacher training, it's very easy to hide away from, and you just want to keep them all close and then send them all off and then just kind of float about. But, you know, we can be flexible with this. You can be flexible with how long you give each child a task to do. The next one, let me know if there's any questions so far. It's that style of learning objective structure in an SEN primary school environment with age-related outcomes. Yes, so in the PRB, they did have age-related outcomes because, for example, we had a child with global development delay. So although they're 11 years old, they are working academically at about year 1. So obviously giving them year 6 outcomes, it just doesn't work. It's too... they're lacking the kind of base knowledge, the foundation skills. So we had to build on that. There were some children that were just at age-related expectations. So the children I worked with were year 3 and year 4, and I gave them year 3 and year 4 work. Although one of those children actually were still, you know, looking at their phonics and things. So we did a lot of work on that. So it really does depend. But yes, Lawrence, you're right. They were in an environment with age-related outcomes. And the rest of the children were working at kind of year 2 level. Yes. So another way that you can do adaptive teaching, and this seems to be the one that people default go to because that's sometimes their interpretation of it, is just additional support. So they might be like, right, this group, they're not working at age-related expectations, so I'm going to sit with them, or I'm going to send the teaching assistant to work with them. And that's not always what should be done. I mean, sometimes it's necessary. They might not be able to work independently, or, you know, it might be a really tricky concept, or for that task, they require a kind of group input or group guided activity. But where possible, try and encourage all different academic abilities to be independent. And, you know, if the task is difficult for them, don't just expect them to sit there and struggle. You can still support them without having a physical adult present. So what I mean by that is, let's take an English lesson. let's say it's an independent write, which some schools, including my own, we do just to see where they're at in their writing. But you might be able to give them word banks. You might be able to give them sound maps if you want them to use their phonics. You might give them some key phrases that they could use. You might make tricky word or common exception words, visible on the wall somewhere for them, so that, I'm sorry, I'm speaking as a year one teacher, so that words like the, my, me, they don't make mistakes on, because it's accessible to them, and it's something they can't use their phonics for. So sometimes it's easy to make mistakes on. But just as a little example, you can see how you can give extra support without always having somebody there. Because then you'll notice that if there's always an adult with a certain group, then other groups tend to be, I don't want to say neglected, but often you might not notice them making, mistakes, or you might not notice misconceptions until you mark it later on, and then it's too late. So that's why, even if you are working with a group, try and float around the rest of the classroom. Or at one point, if a TA is working with a group, you go to that group so you can see how they're doing. And then the TA can do a little sweep of the room, live marking, giving verbal feedback as they go. I think that's really, really important to do as well. So we've got the size of the task, the size of the expectation, the time given for activities and inputs, the support that is provided, and actually, okay, before I go on to the next one, which is input, going back to support, there is support that can be put in place that counts as adaptive teaching that isn't necessarily related to academic work. And I forgot to say that earlier. But, if, for example, you're in an input and there is a child that is very fidgety, they might not be able to stay in their seat. They might wander around. They might, be bashing a pencil against the table. It's often, and behavior is always like a sign of an underlying need, they might need something fidgety. They might need to have some sensory need met. And so instead of being disrupted with the noise of a pencil against a table, you can always try and find ways around this, but also meeting their need. Because very often, if you just keep reminding them, please don't bash your pencil against the table, that doesn't make a difference. If there's a need met, that they need some kind of like sensory activity, telling them to stop won't meet that need. But you can always find quieter alternatives that won't disrupt the whole class. So there's things like kinetic sand, or a little bit of Play-Doh or blue tag, just to keep them focused but also meet that need. Obviously in the PRB, we had loads of those. We had some, I don't know what they're called, kind of like bouncy chairs. It was like an exercise table, but on a chair. We had lots of kinetic sand. We had other things. Some of the pupils, they also had chewy toys, because they would often like chew pencils and things like that. But when you need to write with a pencil, you can't chew it. So they would have kind of chewy toys. Sometimes they just needed to, and obviously you can't do this in mainstream, but, just kind of even sometimes sit on the members of staff's laps, because they just needed some kind of like grounding, some sensory thing. So yes, there's also that. Chulry, is that the name of it? Oh, well, there you go. Now I know. Thank you. But yes, so there's that kind of support as well. And then obviously you've got the different hats that teachers wear in terms of support, which is support with, emotional well-being, children's well-being. You've got the whole support that you might put in place regarding something safeguarding concern. So there's so much support that you can do. And all of this counts as adaptive teaching. Hi, Anam, did I say that right? How are you? Yes, so the fourth different type of way, and obviously there's lots of different ways that I'm not going to go into today, but I don't want to overload. So the fourth one is input. Now, some children might need more of a like model, so constantly going through examples. Some children might need a group guided activity. Some might just really need to focus on concrete or pictorial or abstract. Now, if you haven't come across that before, it's just shortened to CPA, which is specifically introduced in maths. So you start with very concrete things. So let's say you're adding something up. I don't have enough things here. But, you could just hold up one pencil and another pencil, and then they can see you've got one pencil, add one pencil. How many together? 1, 2. too. And then afterwards, you would move that when they're secure in that knowledge to more pictorial. So you might have a picture of two pencils on a page and then get them to add that way. And then afterwards, it would become abstract, where you would show the numbers. And often, I'm making it sound like they're three separate things, but you can often interlink them. But yes, so, children might need different things like that. You're not going to introduce a mathematical concept in primary, at least, all as abstract. Like that's not going to happen, especially with the emphasis on mastery. Even in year 6, things start as concrete. Obviously, it depends on the masking you're using, etc., but it's really important that the input isn't just, this is how you do something, have a go, off you go now in your books or on your worksheet. There's different ways of doing an input. You could, for younger years, maybe have a song that introduces it. You could do, and one lesson that I really enjoyed, actually, this was during my teacher training. I was in year 4 and we were learning about place values. So when you times by 10, for example, you move, the numbers across place values. Sorry, I don't know if I'm opposite, if I'm mirrored in here. I am doing it the right direction, I promise. But yes, and instead of just showing, okay, this is how we do it, she had children at the front of the classroom. And this was early on when I was kind of still observing her. And she made them like physically move. And she did this whole story behind it. So it was almost like role play during a maths lesson. But do you know what? The children really connected with it. And they were like, oh, yeah, because, the old man had to go see blah, blah. I can't remember the story. But, they were really connecting with it. And rather than just, being told this is how it works, off you go, they had a deeper understanding of it and they could apply it independently using the story or not using the story. But again, it's a different way of doing an input. So making it, and it also links to just being engaging, a role play or doing lots of different models, or again, cut-off groups. One group, you might come and just do lots of examples or explain the problem-solving part of their lesson, whereas another, you might just be getting all the maths resources out and showing them what to do that way. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's another way to be creative, but it's also another way of doing adaptive teaching. For some children that might need one-to-one, you have to allocate that time for yourself or your teaching assistant or the support staff to do that one-to-one input with them. And also linked to input, it's really important if you are expecting your learning support or your teaching assistant to do an input, you need to tell them or support them in doing that input first. You can't just be like, right, this is the learning intention. Can you teach them this? Off you go. You either need to give some resources to help them, or you need to just explain like the different things you want covered or how you would explain it. Because then, there is consistency, what's been covered. And then also you can have a really good dialogue at the end, like, oh, how did that child find it? What could we do differently next time? What do you think the next step should be? And I think that is just generally a really important dialogue to have. I hope you don't mind the little tangents I go on here and there. But yes, size, time, support, input. This is the really obvious one. And this is difficulty, how difficult the task is. You can always have the same WALT or LO, LI, people call it different things, like learning intention. But you're not going to give them the same difficulty of task. Now, this is a personal pet hate for me, is when people just go, right, we're going to give them completely different things. Well, I don't give them different things unless, one group really can't access it. Just give them the same thing, the same target, but allow them to access it in different ways. So again, going back to that imperative verb example, one was just filling in the gaps and another was using them independently in a sentence. But there's lots of different ways you can do this in a difficulty. It might be regarding the type of problem they have. Is one problem, like I said, filling the gaps, and another is, identifying the one. So let's say you have like lots of different words, identifying which ones are imperative verbs. Is another one applying it? In maths, are you just doing like calculations and some other people are doing problem solving or, reasoning or justifying their answers? You'd be surprised how many children can whiz through problem-solving reasons. But the moment it says explain why, there's just a blank. So that is already like a different level of difficulty, because they're like, okay, I can do it, but then they can't explain why. So that means that they lack some understanding of the steps or understanding of why, those methods happen. So again, that's a really easy way, that's a really easy way of doing adaptive teaching that only requires a few tweaks here and there, rather than doing 3 different lessons, 3 different inputs, 3 different learning intentions, because ultimately, as much as we can, we need to try and cover all of those things in the national curriculum for every single child, even if they are working at reception level, but they're in year 1 and you're still trying to cover the reception stuff. They still need to have access to some degree the year 1 material. Otherwise, they're still going to be behind in year 2, and then it carries through. And we want to try and bridge those gaps as quickly as we can and as effectively as we can. Now I've got 2 more, and then I'll welcome any questions about like my experience or adaptive teaching or anything I've mentioned so far. The next one is the output. So, if you are in front of the class and you're asking some questions, very often you will notice the same children, the children that are confident in the subject, the children that are kind of like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, put their hand up. And then the others will kind of let those children take the spotlight and kind of shrink away from you a little. Now, if that question that you asked for hands up was a type of formative assessment, you're only going to know or be able to assess those children who put their hand up. You have no idea how the other children are feeling, if they know the answer, or if they're just being shy, or if they're just hesitant, or if they really have no clue what you're talking about. So try and vary the way that you ask children to respond. And this allows you to be kind of clever and sneaky with it, because, and this, applies in secondary as well. Children are very easy to copy the peers that they know are capable. Some years might be aware of how they're laid out, if they're mixed ability or if they are in ability tables, and they will often try and, model or copy or mirror the children that, they know are doing well or that they perceive to be clever. So one thing you can do, like I said, is adapt the output. So one thing I like to do to ensure nobody copies is ask a question, maybe like a true or false thing, ask them to cover their eyes or like put their heads on the table, and then show thumbs up or thumbs down or thumbs in the middle. So that way I know they physically can't copy. And that way I can easily see, okay, this child has got it correct, this child hasn't. But also it avoids the potential shame from a child if they don't have the same answer as everyone else. You'll notice that there's like extreme conformity. If 98% of the class have their thumbs up and 1 has their thumb down, they will quickly change it when they look around and notice everyone has changed. So by doing that exercise, you can see the children's honest answers, the children's honest efforts, even teenagers, without them feeling guilty or them copying. So it's a really good representation. Another thing that you can do, although here again there is the potential of copying, is kind of say, right, split the class in half. There's 2 different options. One is X, one is Y. Go to the one that you agree with, or go to the one that you think is the correct answer. And so, of course, there's going to be those that like dwindle last and then go to the majority. But even then, you can start to see the children that are instantly on it, understand, whiz off. And then those that are kind of like, I don't know. Actually, that exercise is a really nice one when you're trying to promote discussion, because especially if there's no right or wrong answer to it, agree, disagree, that kind of thing, it can be really interesting to go like, oh, why did you go there? Why did you go there? To promote discussion, basically. Just a little tangent again. The last one that I really want to talk about, and it's another O one, it's outcome. Now, I've kind of mentioned this, while explaining the others, but with outcomes, you can do different outcomes for each child, but so that the target is still accessible, because you don't want to do, right, here is a national curriculum, I'm going to give everyone this learning intention, because obviously you want to keep it consistent. However, you know that some children are just not going to reach it, because those children might look at it and be like, I can't do that, and then not even attempt. And if there's not that support put in place, if there's not that input put in place that they need, they might not even attempt. And then you have this whole cycle of come on, we need to do this. Or depending on your school's behavior policy, well, you know the rules. If you don't do it, then you need to stay in a break. And then they have to stay in a break, and then they haven't had their break. And then, they get really fidgety and maybe potentially a bit angry, a bit hungry, all that kind of stuff. And you're just kind of setting yourself up to fail for the entire day just because you knew that learning intention wouldn't be accessible to them. And it's like, why even bother at that point, like for you and for the child? And you just don't want that. So let's say, either you have to try and keep it vague. So focus on, for example, that imperative verbs thing. Your learning intention might be to identify imperative verbs, because those children applying the imperative verbs to a sentence, they're still identifying it. They're realizing this is an imperative verb and not just like an adjective or something. And then those children that are like given a word bank where there's lots of different words jotted in there, like adjectives, nouns, and then imperative verbs, they're still identifying the imperative verb. But again, I'm still adapting the task. Or, those children that have to pick the right imperative verb to put in the right part of the sentence or to match the sentence, they're still identifying imperative verbs. So with that one, it was a very generic learning intention, but everyone could access it. There is no point doing, an intention such as, use imperative verbs to write 5 instructions, because some of them won't be able to access it. And it's the same with maths. You can say to understand something, and then in that learning, if the child has demonstrated an understanding, then they have met that learning intention, even if it's not to the same degree of difficulty. And it's all about just allowing the children to feel that potential for success. You don't want a child to just think, I can't do this, so why am I going to bother? And this applies from young primary to secondary. Like, why would they try? Obviously, in secondary, when you have, compulsory exams like GCSEs and things, it's not going to be as flexible. But then you really have to support that teenager in feeling like they're taking steps towards that. And I think one of my teacher training talks, actually, it was a really inspirational one. They said that the most important word, potentially in the whole of the English language, is the word yet. Because a lot of children will say, I can't do it, but then you can add the word yet to it. And then it gives them that idea of hope. It gives them their idea of, okay, I'm taking a step towards this goal. My goal is to be able to write 5 step-by-step instructions. Okay, so first, let's identify, be able to understand what imperative verbs are. Then let's practice, writing 1 sentence at a time. Let's practice, getting your writing endurance up. And next time, try 3. And then next lesson, try 5. So, of course, right now you can't do it yet. But next time, we will practice until we get closer to that goal. And I think that really helps. And using language like that, where you promote a growth mindset, is really, really important in children and teenagers alike. So, yes, that's kind of my tangent, if you will, on adaptive teaching. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they want to ask me? Feel free to just tell me now. If not, then I'll give it a few minutes. But if not, then I will let you all get on with your evenings. Hope that this upcoming week is a good one for you. And then I will, head off. I also am regretting now not having a drink of water. Didn't think ahead on that one. Let's see if there's anything on Instagram either. I didn't manage to do it on both Instagram. How annoying. But okay, right. Well, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to comment them down below on this video that I will be saving. But also feel free to message me at the Petite Primary on Instagram. And I'm also Petite Primary on Twitter as well. So I hope you all have a good evening. I hope this was useful for you. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you soon. Bye.